All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the mid-session webinar. I'm very excited to have you all here. I think people will probably still keep coming in, but we want to get started because we have a lot to talk about today. So I am Heather Tritton. I am the president and CEO of the Colorado Children's Campaign. Very excited to be here and also very excited that we are actually a little more than halfway through the session. So it seems like things are going very quickly, which is great. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to hear these updates and kind of get caught up on what's going on for kids at the Capitol this session. And just a couple of housekeeping things. One, we are recording this and we will email out that recording as well as our slides tomorrow morning. And we are also happy to take questions. We're using the webinar function, so you have to ask questions through the Q&A. So if you put your questions there, we will address them at the end. And we will also be sending out some other resources and links tomorrow. So let's go ahead and just get started. So these are the issues that we work on every day, and we are going to give updates on our key priority areas of K-12 education, early childhood, health, and economic security. We see these as very deeply interconnected and really important to shaping how children are doing in our state and ensuring that we have a good system for kids from birth until the end of high school. Each of these areas comes with its own set of challenges and really requires a lot of thoughtful and strategic advocacy to drive meaningful change. And so I'm excited for us to be able to share some of the things that we're doing this session. And we're also going to have updates on both our key priority areas with bills as well as budget. And these are all the things that have been making their way through the legislative process this year. We have two, as we sort of think about the legislative session, and I think I talked about this a little bit in our pre-session webinar, there are two overarching themes that are really shaping a lot of our work this year, and they are our tight budget and our shifting federal landscape. So when we think about our state's budget realities, we know that we have a very challenging fiscal environment, and lawmakers this year need to make over $1 billion in budget reductions to achieve balance. And we have to have balance. That's in our Constitution. So that doesn't mean that nothing can be funded, but it does mean that resources for expanding programs or launching new programs are pretty limited and hard to get. And so our advocacy this year has really been focused on protecting the progress that we have made in previous years and ensuring that programs and policies that support low-income families are safeguarded and ensuring students receive a quality education, and we are upholding critical services for kids and families. So what that functionally means is that we are concerned about things like protecting the new school funding formula that was passed last year, ensuring that universal pre-K gets funded, looking at health insurance for undocumented kids, and cash assistance for families living in extreme poverty. So we are going to be talking about all of those things throughout this morning. And then in terms of the federal landscape, there's a lot to say here, but we know that as the new administration has taken power, there have been a lot of unpredictable changes and moves, and that presents a lot of challenges for us as a state and for our state budget. So we are watching that closely. We also know that there's a shift in the federal landscape in terms of the public health emergency that was put in place during COVID. So we are seeing the Medicaid unwind, we're seeing potential shifts in childcare assistance and changes for other safety net programs. So our role is to really anticipate and navigate these challenges strategically to maintain and strengthen critical services like safeguarding access to childcare and safety net programs, addressing the impact of the Medicaid unwind on our vulnerable populations, acknowledging the anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies that could impact our progress here, and identifying opportunities to align federal and state policies to maintain critical supports for families. So we are closely monitoring all of these federal changes. We have been in contact with our federal delegation, and we really want to make sure that people are informed and understand the positive and negative impacts of all of these federal changes. However, today's webinar is really about state level updates. So please know that we are watching the federal stuff, and if you have questions, please reach out to us. We're happy to talk about it. But today we're really going to be focused on state level work. And so I'll start out by sharing that so far during this session, 499 bills have been introduced. This is as of last night, so I don't know what's happened over there this morning. We have 199 Senate bills, 300 House bills, and we've already had 91 bills that have passed through the House and Senate and have been signed by or sent to the governor. So we're really excited, and we're going to put some links in the chat as we go with our bill trackers. And I am going to now hand this over to Maddie Ashore, who's going to talk about K-12 education.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much, Heather. As Heather said, I'm Maddie Ashore. I'm the director of our K-12 education portfolio here at the campaign. I was born and raised in Colorado. I attended D11 school, so it's a real honor to be here, making sure that all Colorado kids get the same great education that I did. Just to start us off, the campaign's goal in K-12 education is that all youth have the resources and opportunities in their schools and communities to learn and succeed. So as Heather mentioned, the campaign's top priority for the 2025 session is to ensure implementation of the new school funding formula that was passed last session. So as a refresher, the school funding formula is the math problem that the state uses to divvy up about $10 billion in funding to the state's 178 school districts. Advocates and legislators worked for decades to rewrite the school funding formula. It was originally enacted in 1994 because the old funding formula that had been in place for 30 years largely benefited property-wealthy communities, which exacerbated funding and outcome disparities across the state. So there are three things I like everyone to understand and remember about the new school funding formula. First, the new school funding formula reverses the order of operations. In the new school funding formula, student characteristics, like students living in poverty, students learning English, or students who have special learning needs, are considered first. Anyone who can remember their sixth grade math education can think back to PEMDAS, the order of operations. If you change the order of operations in a funding formula, it will significantly change the outcome. So by making our new school funding formula more student-centered, we're hoping to drive more dollars and resources to the students who need more dollars and resources and the schools that serve them. The second thing to remember about the new school funding formula is that it more than doubles the weights for students who are living in poverty, students who are learning English, and students with special learning needs. The word weight is just a fancy budget word for increased funding or a little higher percentage of funding for each of those students. If you had told me 10 years ago that we could double the weights for those students, I probably would have laughed. Enormous win for those students and for the schools that serve them. So that's the second thing to remember about the new school funding formula. It doubled the weights for students living in poverty, students learning to speak English, and students with special learning needs. The third and last thing to remember about the new school funding formula is that it caps the cost of living factor at 0.23. This will help the state redirect hundreds of millions of dollars towards schools serving, again, higher numbers of students living in poverty, students learning English, or students with special learning needs. This cost of living factor was the campaign's biggest beef or biggest problem with the 1994 formula, because it was the piece of the formula that was, again, driving or largely benefiting property wealthy communities and exacerbating some inequities. So it's hard to overstate the enormity of the win that is the new school funding formula. We have been working towards a new school funding formula for decades, and if we can make it stick, it'll be the biggest win and the biggest investment that we've made in K-12 education since 2005 when we passed Amendment 23. So we passed a new school funding formula, yay, last session. Then just a few months later, the state reset property tax rates, which caused revenue projections to fall by quite a bit and put us into the $1.2 billion shortfall that Heather mentioned earlier. So we're facing a real boondoggle here, right? How do we increase funding for public education while at the same time we are decreasing funding for the public in general? In other words, how do we turn on the new funding formula to deliver bigger checks to schools in July of 2025? So to do this, the state needs to find about 90 million additional dollars for education in this year's K-12 appropriations. And there are a couple of ideas on the table for right now how to do this. So the governor gets to take the first stab at writing a balanced budget. In his November and January requests, he had two ideas for how to face this boondoggle, how to fix this. First, the governor suggested that we move to an on again, off again, or a 2-year implementation cycle. So over 7 years, we'll implement a little bit of the formula each of those 7 years. In tax assessment years, schools can expect to see slightly bigger checks. In non-tax assessment years, schools should expect to see slightly smaller but still bigger checks. So this was a way for the governor to reduce the strain on the state education fund and the general fund while still turning on this new funding formula, which is really important that we do. That idea was really well received. The second idea the governor had was to eliminate enrollment averaging, and there's been a lot of talk about this. So enrollment averaging is a school district practice of looking at your enrollment numbers over the past 5 years, previous to the new formula, 4 years under the new formula. And it's just exactly what it sounds like, averaging your enrollment. This helps school districts deal with the budget changes that are driven by changes in enrollment, right? If the school funding system is built on per pupil revenue. If you lose, say, 10% of your students in 1 year or 5%, that's a 10 or 5% cut, which makes it really hard for school district leaders to, promise folks that they'll have a job next year, keep things running and keep things smooth. However, because we use enrollment averaging in the state, and we are actually the only state in the country that still allows enrollment averaging up to 4 years. There are a handful of states that do this, and they only allow for 3 years. But because we do 4-year enrollment averaging in Colorado, it means that we're double funding students, right? It means that if a student leaves one school and goes to a different school, both those schools get to count that student in their account for their budgetary purposes. This costs the state $190 million a year to double fund those students. So the governor's idea was to eliminate enrollment averaging and use the savings to pay for the new school funding formula. However, this idea was not very well received. There are a lot of districts that really depend on enrollment averaging to keep their budget smooth and keep things operating. So the question now is, how do we move forward? And there are a couple of emerging solutions here. So first, I'll say that the consensus among legislators and advocates here is that a budget compromise that turns on the new school funding formula must be, can be, and will be reached. We can and will negotiate and tweak the dials on things like averaging, cost of living, size and locale factor, all those other pieces of the formula to ensure that student experiences are not disrupted in 2025 or later. But we can't and won't negotiate on an equitable student-centered funding formula that Colorado students need and deserve. So we're halfway through the session, and this is the emerging ideas or the emerging solutions that we have for this budget boondoggle that we're in. We were talking about implementing only 10% of the new formula this year instead of 18%, which drives down the total cost or the total cost of implementing the program this year. There's been talk about redistributing $80 million in grant funding that CDE oversees and distributes to schools across the state. The reason that this is on the table is because grant programs like this, competitive grant programs, have some equity issues, right? Schools that don't have full-time staff who are able to manage grant applications and renewals and all of the work that goes into that don't have as much access to those dollars. So if we're moving toward a more student-centered and more equitable system, looking at those grants is one of the ways that we could do that and take that step. We're also talking about updating enrollment averaging maybe over time. So we could move to 3-year enrollment averaging like the other states that use enrollment averaging do. We could phase out enrollment averaging, so allow districts to use enrollment averaging for 3 years next year, 2 years the year after. We could hold particular outlier school districts harmless in enrollment averaging. So say you're a small rural district in Colorado and if 5% of your students leave, it will essentially shutter one of your schools. Maybe holding those schools outside of the enrollment averaging process that we're in right now. And then, of course, we're also making some difficult cuts to programs across the state to reduce strain on the general fund and the state education fund. So all of this will be decided in the School Finance Act. We expect to see a draft of that act in the next couple of weeks, but know that the campaign will be watching this very closely and working very hard to ensure that the new school funding formula does indeed turn on. So while we're working to increase funding for schools across Colorado, we're also working to more accurately measure and support student needs across the state. So prioritizing hungry students in the Healthy School Meals for All program is a top priority. As a refresher, the Healthy School Meals for All program is a statewide program enacted by voters in 2022 that allows schools to provide meals to all of the students in their schools, not just the students who qualify for reduced price lunch or free. The program has been wildly successful, and the demand for the program has exceeded the amount of money that the ballot measure for the proposition originally raised. So we're having to go back to the voters to ask for 2 ballot measures in the 2025 election. And those 2 ballot measures are in House Bill 25, 1274. So the first ballot measure that this bill asks for allows the state to retain more that the original ballot measure Prop F raises for the program every year. Right now, those funds are capped by Tabor and have to be refunded. This first ballot measure would remove that requirement. The second measure expands the pool of money that the state taxes essentially to raise revenue for this program. So the campaign spoke in support of House Bill 1274 last week. It passed out of House Education and House Finance. And we believe that if this bill passes and the 2 ballot measures pass, the state will have a sustainable funding source for this very necessary and very popular program. However, if the ballot measures do not pass in the fall, that program will have to look at a cut. And if that does happen, the campaign will be working hard to ensure that students who otherwise wouldn't get fed under this program. We're also working on a way to finalize a new count of students living in poverty in schools. The campaign led a bill in 2022 to update the way that the state counts students for at-risk funding. We set up a pilot program using census data to try to add a little bit more nuance to the counts that districts are submitting to the state for at-risk funding. But the pilot showed us that using census data is really tricky and challenging, and we are looking for a different way to move forward with that proposal. So right now, we're working to codify some data sharing agreements between the Department of Education and the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing to allow CDE to use direct certification data or Medicaid data to better identify students. We will likely see a finalization of this in the School Finance Act, which I already mentioned, in a couple of weeks, but we'll be keeping a close eye on this issue moving forward. Last but not least, we're also working to enhance positive school climates, and there's a couple of key bills in this space. The first up is House Bill 25-1248, which will clarify how schools and districts collect and report restraint and seclusion data. This is a campaign priority. Back in 2022, we led the Positive School Climates Act, which just directed CDE to collect and report and analyze on student experiences in school. That bill directed CDE to publish all of that data starting in August of 2024. The first reporting was put out in August of 2024, last August, but it was missing restraint and seclusion data because there was a lot of confusion and frustration among districts about how the Positive School Climate Act language interacted with other statutory language around protecting folks with disabilities. So House Bill 25-1248 just clears up and clarifies how schools and districts need to collect and report this data. And I believe John dropped a really great article from Chalkbeat, sort of getting into the details on that into the chat. Up next, we are working on a bill to ask all school districts to ban or limit cell phone use in classrooms. This has been going on in Colorado schools for some time. Most school districts already have a policy to ban or limit cell phone use in schools. And the stories that are coming out of those schools are really positive. Teachers are saying things like, it's like I have my classroom back. It's like I have my kids back. So all this bill asks is that all school districts have a policy in place by a certain date. And we think this will do really good things for school climates across the state. And last but not least, we are playing some budget defense or making sure that all of the mental health programs that the campaign and all of our partners have stood up over the last couple of years that target youth sort of survive this round of budget cuts coming up. And then I'll just quickly mention two more bills. First, today in House Education, we'll hear a bill to update our statewide accountability system. This bill is the result of the work of another task force that has been sitting down looking at how to make our accountability system work better for schools and students. It's a really big, complicated, and technical bill built off of a really big, complicated, and technical report from that task force, which I believe John is dropping in the chat right now. But we'll be watching this carefully. We want to make sure that all student data, particularly student data around kids who are low income, kids who are learning English, and kids with special learning needs, we want to make sure that data is protected and clear in whatever accountability system the state lands on. And then last, the campaign spoke a couple weeks ago in support of a bill to require financial literacy courses and classes, as well as the FAFSA completion in the ICAP program. The ICAP program is established in 2014 to sort of guide and direct states or school districts in developing career and college pathway plans for each and every student. So by including financial literacy and including completion of the FAFSA form inside that course, to put it in the words of one of the sponsors, Representative Bacon, we share the language of power that is financial literacy. So we're excited to see that bill moving forward. I think that's it for me, and I am now going to pass it over to Melissa to talk about early childhood.
Thank you, Maddie. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Mattis. I'm the Director of Early Childhood at the Colorado Children's Campaign, and I am a former kindergarten teacher and brand new mama. I have a 4-month-old son at home, and so this work is deeply personal to me. I'm happy to be here with you all today. We will ground ourselves in the amazing transformation that has happened in Colorado over the last few years, universal preschool. The data shows this program is working for families. It saves them an average of $6,000 annually. And this is the number on this slide represents over 70% of Colorado's 4-year-olds, which I would say is evident of how much families are looking for, need, and want to find early childhood programs and supports. The other great thing that we love to highlight, because we are the Colorado Children's Campaign, we love to make sure that families have choice in the setting in which they can send their kiddos to preschool. It's a great thing that this program, out of the about 2,000 providers that we have, about half of them are based in the community. So this really shows us that families are having choice in their preschool setting. Go to the next slide. So there are a number of budget requests for the Department of Early Childhood that we are following closely and advocating for. This includes the governor's $11.1 million increase for universal preschool. The bulk of this increase is the Joint Budget Committee actually put on hold pending the March revenue forecast. So that means pending the updates on the most current updates on how the state budget is looking. One portion of this request was approved, the continued support for local coordinating organizations and the provider rate increase. We're really excited for both of those requests to go through. This investment allows universal preschool to grow and maintaining the high quality care that children deserve, as well as the network of navigation for families that was built in 2022 to improve our system and make sure that families can access the care and support that they need. Lastly, we were happy to see a piece of legislation die in committee last week that would have damaged the long-term success of this program. Senate Bill 25-119, modifications to the Department of Early Childhood and Universal Preschool Program, failed in committee, and this bill as written would have done a lot of things that we did not support. It would have changed the governance system of the Department of Early Childhood. Right now, the executive director has sole rulemaking authority, and this bill would have created a type 1 statewide board of early childhood. To us, this decision is rushed. There is actually a third-party independent review of the entire Department of Early Childhood underway right now, including key questions like the governance structure. And we believe strongly that legislators should wait to receive the data to see the full picture about what is recommended to move forward before making such a substantive change. This bill also allowed providers direct access to the Unified Universal Preschool application, which we believe would have caused some significant equity issues, privileging those providers with staff with infrastructure to make full use of the application, to potentially identify and enroll their preferred families, rather than potentially families that might need to have care in a certain location or with a certain provider. We also had significant privacy concerns about allowing providers direct access to the entire application or even the entire list of families from their catchment area who are applying for universal preschool. It was really concerning to us, this bill. A key portion of why this was concerning is that all of these requirements that it would have put into effect were, the Department of Early Childhood was asked to do this with no additional funding, which means that it would have had to make cuts to programs and projects already underway, which are important to working to improve the program. For example, universal preschool or family supports, wraparound services. They would have had to have made significant cuts to be able to do this. Lastly, I mentioned that we support local coordinating organizations. This bill, as it was originally written, would have removed them from the process of universal preschool entirely. We know that families rely on that local captain to help them navigate a system that is still complicated. So next, I'll go ahead and touch on the budget requests to support CCAP, or our Child Care Assistance Program. The governor proposed a $10 million general fund increase for CCAP. The Joint Budget Committee allocated that $10 million, but changed the funding source. They pulled $10 million from our federal Child Care and Development Grant funding. And this is significant because that funding is not available in an ongoing manner to the state. And so we will need a significant increased investment of general fund, meaning state dollars, for CCAP in the future. This is also significant because you may have heard that the federal government this time last year began the process to change the rules for child care assistance programs in states to make the program better serve families in service of better outcomes for kids. But unfortunately, as is an unfortunate theme in my presentation, that also did not come with additional money for states to implement these new rules and to improve their programs. So Colorado is looking at potentially having to cut services to families in order to come to federal compliance. The state has a 2-year waiver granted for implementation of all of these rules, so the deadline is in 2026. But this is a huge problem we're deeply engaged on, thinking through how do we prioritize funding for childcare and funding for preschool. These two things should not ever be pitted against each other. Both are vital to supporting Colorado's families. A few pieces of legislation working through the process this year support childcare affordability and accessibility. Senate Bill 4 makes childcare waitlist fees refundable, and requires better transparency from providers about their fees. We see that families anecdotally, and I actually know this personally now with my kiddo, have an incredibly difficult time finding childcare and often pay waitlist fees to just literally sit on a wait list, to never move forward, to never get a spot at this childcare. And so this bill creates a pathway for families to request that money. House Bill 1011, childcare purchased by private equity. This bill looks at putting in some protections for childcares who may be purchased by private equity firms, including transparency requirements and requiring a 60-day notice for layoffs should the private equity firm decide to make significant staffing changes. Both of these bills we think are good for families. We know that the childcare ecosystem faces some significant funding challenges, but the solutions to those funding challenges are not, charging families upwards of $500 to $1,200 to sit on a wait list and never get care. So there are two more bills here I'll touch on supporting childcare accessibility. The first is House Bill 1296. This is an enormous bill. It is very wonky. It is adjusting a number of different tax expenditures for the state of Colorado. But I would love to make sure that we highlight today, one of the things it does is it extends Colorado's child care contribution tax credit for 2 additional years through January 1st, 2030. So for donations to child care that are donated in tax year 2029. This bill, the child care contribution tax credit, it's a 50% tax credit on eligible donations to child care up to a limit. And this has really incentivized significant donations to child care in our state because taxpayers can get half of that back. So we would really like to see this continue. It's our state's 3rd largest tax credit most years. It's about $33 million in donations that go to child care because of this credit. Lastly, partners at Healthy Childcare Colorado and Healthier Colorado are running Senate Bill 17, bringing Colorado in line with national best practices in early childhood health and well-being. This bill is specifically focused on childcare health consultants and the Healthy Steps programs. These two things together, childcare health consultants provide its essential support to providers, making sure that they offer inclusive, high-quality childcare for all kiddos, including those with special health needs. And Healthy Steps is a sort of a early intervention screening and home visiting program that happens in pediatric settings, making sure that our youngest kiddos in our state have the supports they need to develop healthily. So we're in strong support of that bill as well. Lastly, I will highlight for you 2 key advocacy and sort of non-legislative projects that we're focused on. Early intervention, you may have heard that the program suddenly a few weeks ago was $4 million overspent for this current fiscal year, meaning that they were going to have to cut services to kids on Medicaid on March 3rd. So 10 days ago, the cuts would have had to go into effect. We're grateful that the Department of Early Childhood, the Joint Budget Committee, and the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing mobilized to identify a short-term funding fix. We think, obviously can't be sure given all the unpredictability in the legislative session, that funding fix is likely to be finalized and move forward in the process and become a piece of legislation this week. And we're following that closely. But key to this conversation is that in the long term, early intervention also is projecting to be overspent potentially by quite a bit more than $4 million. And so this is a place where we as the Children's Campaign stand strongly in that we should not be even discussing cuts to services for children without looking in every other possible place for savings and to create efficiencies. And we want to mitigate as many negative impacts as we can on those children and families. Lastly, I mentioned evaluations and processes to improve statewide programs for early childhood. We are deeply engaged in many of those. We are on the steering committee for the third-party independent review of the entire Department of Early Childhood and sit on the rule rewrite committee for the Child Care Assistance Program, helping to make sure that program is designed in a way that puts long-term child outcomes as a key measure of success. Other key priorities include making sure that we can break down silos to ensure effective blending and braiding of funds, continue our work towards data accessibility and transparency so we know how we're doing, and strengthening our systems as a whole. With that, I'm excited to pass to my colleague Tony Sarge to talk about our health priorities.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Good morning, everybody. I'm really grateful to have the pleasure to chat with you all about how we ensure that the children in Colorado have access to comprehensive health services and really improve their well-being. My name is Tony Sarge. I am the Health Policy Director here at the campaign, and like many of you, I have had to interact with our health system, and it's not always easy and it's not always clear, and we're here to do better for the kids in Colorado. So as we've already discussed this morning, Colorado is facing a difficult budget year. And in Colorado, our health department, or the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, known as HCPF, makes up over a third of our budget's general fund money, therefore has been at the center of attention this year. So the Children's Campaign has been advocating for many months, even prior to the legislative session, around many critical health programs that impact children, such as continuous eligibility for kids 0 to 3, CHIP, or the Children's Health Insurance Program coverage for kids, and Cover All Coloradans. So, update to you all since we last talked at the beginning of session. Cover All Coloradans, as a reminder, began on January 1st, 2025, and this marked the start of Medicaid coverage for all children and pregnant people, regardless of immigration status in Colorado, if they qualify based on income. So I'm thrilled to share that as of this week, 11,200 children and 3,000 pregnant or postpartum adults now have Medicaid coverage thanks to this coverage expansion. These newly eligible populations have the same Medicaid coverage and CHIP coverage, including preventative care, well child visits, oral health, behavioral health care, and family planning services. You can see here we have an action alert on the screen. You can take action through this QR code or the link in the chat to really email your legislators and let them know how critical this program is to our community. We've been working hard with our implementation coalition and partners around the state across the last year, really leading up to the start of coverage on this program. And we're continuing to advocate in the face of a really challenging budget year to make sure that this program continues to serve the children and families of Colorado. I'm also really glad to say that the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, their supplemental mid-year budget did pass. So this is a mid-year budget adjustment for Medicaid, and it contains all of the funding for the children and pregnant and postpartum adults that are eligible for Medicaid this year. So we're really glad to see that that has passed the legislature already. So there are many folks at the Capitol, in addition to us, working to increase and protect continued access to care. In addition to Cover All Coloradans, we're excited that House Bill 1297 was introduced, which will support the continued funding for the OmniSalud and reinsurance programs in our state. OmniSalud is a private health insurance program for undocumented Coloradans who are not eligible for Cover All Coloradans. And it's a huge priority for us at the Children's Campaign to ensure that this program continues to be funded. So we're excited to keep working with our partners and make sure that that funding is secured for this year and beyond. Additionally, House Bill 251174 proposes a way to increase funds for Colorado's federally qualified health centers through increasing a pot of money that's called the Primary Care Fund. We're really hopeful to find a way forward to increase critical funding for these safety net clinics who've really faced financial challenges in the face of the public health emergency unwind. We're also really grateful that we get to work with many partners to improve youth mental health in the state of Colorado. Last week, House Bill 1002 passed the legislature and is now headed to the governor's desk to be signed. This bill is really critical because many families do not get the behavioral health supports they need, even when their insurance plan should cover those services. This bill increases both access and affordability for families seeking that mental health care through their insurance programs. In addition to working on cell phones and schools legislation that Maddie mentioned earlier in the presentation. The Children's Campaign and our partners are also taking on social media access for kids. Research really shows a clear connection between poor mental health and social media usage. And we know that 51% of teens are spending more than 4 hours a day on social media. So House Bill 1287 will be up in its first hearing next week. This bill establishes requirements for social media companies to protect youth in Colorado by implementing a variety of increased parental controls and restricting some of the addictive features of social media. Additionally, last night I had the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 86, which passed out of its second committee with a vote of 11-2 yesterday. This bill holds social media platforms to a higher standard of both transparency and accountability and aims to protect youth as they're engaging in the online world. I'm looking forward to answer your questions, and I'm going to pass it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to share some updates on policy priorities in our economic security policy area today. My name is Sarah Barnes, and I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Economic Security here. So first of all, I'm really excited to share an update on a bill this session that will help improve data in our TANF program, likely to be heard in appropriations tomorrow. So we're really excited about that. As a reminder, TANF is a program that serves families with very low incomes with different types of supports. And one of the most important types of supports is basic cash assistance. Families who are eligible for that cash assistance are living below the 50% of the federal poverty level, so living in extreme poverty. Colorado's TANF program is county administered, which means it's implemented at the local level, and we don't currently have clear standardized statewide data on large portions of our TANF program. This standardized data is needed, and House Bill 1279 will implement a process for more standardized collecting and reporting of data. We note that despite the low eligibility criteria in the program, we continue to see increases in administrative funding in the program of how we're spending these dollars, and also what the outcomes and efficacy of that spending are. Required outcomes and levels of evidence for services that are paid for with our TANF funds. And lastly, the bill will require the state to look at our current eligibility for basic cash assistance and make recommendations for how the state could update that eligibility. Currently cannot make more than $421 a month in order to qualify for basic cash assistance. It's also really important to note that we should wait to have better data in hand before we make any changes to our TANF program that cut assistance for families. The Works Allocation Committee, which is a set of county representatives, recently made recommendations definitely pause increases to basic cash assistance in the program, and also roll back some policies that have improved access to the program for families. And these policies are part of what will be evaluated in House Bill 1279, and we should wait to make any changes to the program before we have this data. Next, I'd like to share about Senate Bill 197, a bill that will modernize our Tony Gramscis program. Senate Bill 197 will update the 31-year-old program, which was created by the Children's Campaign and several other organizations in 1993. It provides funding to local organizations that work with children, youth, and families to prevent youth crime and violence, as well as child abuse and neglect. The Tony Gramsci's program, or TGYS, has not really been meaningfully updated since its creation, and this bill will modernize the program in a few different ways. It will importantly increase access for small organizations by creating different applicant types and streamlining some reporting requirements. It will also simplify the volunteer board's responsibilities by transferring the administrative functions of the program to TGYS staff, who are equipped to administer the program. And it will drop matching requirements for mentoring programs in TGYS, which is currently the only funding priority in the program that has a matching requirement. We're really excited about this bill, which will actually be heard in its first committee this afternoon in the Senate. And lastly, I'll mention a few priorities to keep families in Colorado housed. House Bill 1032, which is led by our partners at Enterprise Community Partners and the Coalition for the Homeless, would create a cross-agency council and an advisory committee of experts to recommend holistic approaches to address homelessness in Colorado, including for families with children. Colorado has seen a sharp increase in the number of children who are experiencing homelessness in Colorado. It has actually more than doubled in the last year. This bill has passed its first committee in the House. And lastly, I'll mention the Eviction Legal Defense Fund, which provides really critical access to legal supports to renters when they're facing evictions. And as the Joint Budget Committee, as you've heard, is continuing to make really tough decisions this year to balance its budget, we need to make sure we're exploring all possible as a critical support when renters are facing an eviction. We know from data from the program that over 16,000 renters in Colorado have received legal support through this fund, which has often prevented evictions, which lead to homelessness. I'm going to stop there and turn it back to Heather.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. We answered some of the questions that actually people put in the Q&A in there because we were running a little short on time. But Sarah, there's a question about the qualification for TANF. Did you say that it was $421 to qualify for TANF?
That is correct. So based on their household size, and so just as an example, a family who has one parent and two children cannot make more than $421 a month to qualify for basic cash assistance in the program. It's a really outdated eligibility standard. And as Colorado is continuing to improve the TANF program, we want to be looking at ways that we can update that criteria.
Awesome, thank you. Melissa, I think this one is for you. It's a question about sitting on rewrite meetings. I think they're talking about CCAP. So is there an opportunity for individuals to sit on the rewrite meetings?
Yes. So there are voting members named to the rewrite committee, and those members have votes to make the decisions, but they're public meetings and you can sit in and listen. Renee, I might put my email in the chat. You can reach out and I can help you get connected.
I can actually answer the next one. How many low-income children are there in Colorado? According to our last kids count, there were 133,000 children living in poverty in Colorado. And then Maddie, sorry, you talked about healthy school meals. Is healthy school meals being attacked? Is this true?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. I would say that there's just been a lot of consternation about the fact that the original ballot measure enough money for the program. A lot of people feel some kind of way about going back to the voters to ask for more money for a program that they already approved. So you could sort of characterize it as less an attack and more as just some doubts about the state's ability to pay for it. However, if the two ballot measures that we discussed today do pass in the fall, the campaign does believe that the state will have enough funding to keep that program up, running, sustainable, and meeting the needs of kids across the state.
Awesome. And I would encourage people to click on the Q&A. We did answer a few questions there. And I just have a couple of little plugs to make before we wrap up here. So first is we're very excited on April 2nd. It will be Speak Up for Kids Day. We do this event with Clayton Early Learning, and also we are really excited because we're going to start our day at History Colorado, and then we'll move to the Capitol and chit chat with some legislators. And the purpose of the day is really to help people understand how they can access the legislature, how they can advocate. And then we really want people to think about things that are important to them, head over to the Capitol and talk to legislators about issues that impact you and solutions that you see. So you can scan this QR code and register right now. It's free. Please join us. We have one more. This is a 3-part series. We have one more policy webinar at the end of the session. So session ends on Wednesday, May 7th. On May 8th at 10 o'clock in the morning, we will be here ready to let you know how all of this ended up. So looking forward to having resolution on all of this and sharing that with you on May 8th. Again, scan that QR code and register for that now and get it on your calendar. I just referenced some data from our last kids count. Our 2025 kids count is going to be released on May 28th. This is earlier than we did last year, so we're trying to move to the spring. It will be a hybrid event, so please join us in person if you can at the Colorado Health Foundation from 8:30 to 10:30. We'll have some food there. It will be lovely. We will actually present from 9 to 10. So for the virtual option, you would just log on at 9 o'clock. And we will be giving you the update of all the new data that we have. So join us for that, and feel free to scan this code and get registered for that right now as well. And then our last event that I'm going to talk about is, it is our 40th anniversary. We are really excited about this. And we are going to have a birthday party on September 24th at the Hangar Club in Lowry. And it's going to be a great opportunity to look back on the last 40 years of what the Children's Campaign has done and how we've grown and changed. We're working on some fun videos and other great surprises for the evening. So please put this on your calendar now, and we will have registration for that soon. And we're looking for sponsors at this point. So if you're interested, please let us know. And then we always want to plug our Kids Flash newsletter. This is actually the best way to stay up to date in between our webinars. So we do this every other week. We send out updates. So scan this QR code. We really love QR codes. And sign up for Kids Flash if you aren't getting that already. And then just a big thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time and your interest in the legislature and what is happening for children there. So thank you always for your support, and we look forward to seeing you on May 8th.